So let us all welcome Dr. David Creech from SFA. I'm going to let him tell you about his work there, and then he'll talk to us about native plants. So Dr. Creech.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Bob, too. That was a very interesting webinar. I stuck in my mind is 4 million acres of lawn in the township. That just kind of shocked me. We could just throw away the lawnmowers and just have native plants. Basically, I've titled this talk, "The Natives Are Restless." And essentially, just to let you know where I'm at, I'm in Nacogdoches, Texas. That's how you spell it. We're the garden capital of Texas. We're about 2.5 hours north and just a hair east of where you are now. We normally are zone 8B, and we normally get about 48 inches of rain per year. Most of it comes in 1 or 2 deluges, as most of you know, with the climate like it is. A little outline, I want to say a few words about what I do. I direct SFA gardens here at Nacogdoches, Texas at Stephen F. Austin State University. We have about 128 acres. Going to touch on climate change and some of our climate woes in Texas. What is a native plant? Kind of kick around some ideas there. Have a couple of case studies, talk about ball cypress and oaks in our landscapes. And then what are nativars? And then a little bit of keys to successful plant establishment, and then kind of wrap up with a few conclusions. We are a collection of theme gardens. We started in 1985 here on the campus of Stephen F. Austin State University. So we do have a 42-acre native plant center. We have a creek that traverses the campus, and we kind of own on both sides of that creek. We have a mast arboretum, which is 8 acres. That's where we started in 85 with students and I only. Ruby Maya's azalea garden, that's an 8-acre garden here that was gifted or endowed by Dottie Wisely. So if you see a name on these, it means we have an endowment that helps us support the efforts of that garden. The Gala Mize garden was a gift from Ray Mize. That's about 8 acres. Recreational Trails and Gardens is a 40-acre patch with trails and footpath bridges, et cetera. And then we have some trial gardens and some outreach as well. So we're a busy collection of folks. This is our headquarters at the Native Plant Center. It's the old Tucker House. It goes back to the 1930s. And we office here as well as the Conservation Fund, as well as Dr. James Kroll, who's White-tailed Deer Institute. And we have our environmental education program that's kind of based here as well. So when you look out the window of my office, you can see what a joyous place I have to work. But we do use native plants exclusively at the Native Plant Center. So we stay true to the cause here at the office and around the landscapes that are here. I have to admit up front that I am a past president of the Native Plant Society of Texas, but I have been seen admiring other plants. And we have a long history of, since 85, of looking at a range of plant materials. And so the azalea garden is complete with lots of Japanese maples that have finally gotten size and stature to give you this kind of view. You'd almost think you were in the Northeast because we do color up so well. This is the staff a few years ago. Basically, we're young. Well, I'm not young, but we're lean, mean, and we're gardeners here at SFA. And so we do have, currently that shows 9. We went down to 6 with COVID, and we're struggling to get back. We're at 8 right now, struggling with soft money versus state money. So we have some reality here with the post-COVID era. My whole life, and yours too maybe, is I had this great plan and dreams, and not everything has worked out exactly like we thought it would. There's always surprises. The latest, not just at this institution of higher learning, is we have a lot of fiscal woes, and it's due to enrollment issues and COVID discouraging kids, and teachers are retiring and not being replaced. It's not just here, it's at A&M, it's at a lot of institutions. Being a college educator in this era of social distancing is tricky right now. These decisions are all made by the Board of Regents at SFA, and they have a very, very tough job keeping our ship afloat and keeping faculty, staff, students happy with all of the constraints we currently have. I oftentimes refer to my administration as where all my great ideas meet insurmountable obstacles, but it is a joke. I really have had some good fortune here at SFA, and we've built an incredible garden. COVID woes, March of 2020, we were hit with a shutdown of the campus. Everybody went home. There's got to be some kind of a new normal that comes along. When is it? I don't know, but right now we're not there yet. We do have a wonderful conservation education building that's Ina Brundette's gift to our program, and it is 80% generated. The electricity is 80% from the sun. We're real proud of that. It's got a lot of conservation features in it. And of course, we use a native plant garden around it. We're just now, after 18 months, opening up to, this is prior to COVID, opening up our lecture series, which is once a month, and our different field days and workshops and weddings and events. And it's a slow go getting that back on track because we're still having some issues with COVID, as you all know. The environmental education program is a big deal here. And to be honest with you, it's this young lady right here, Elise Rodewald, who timed her retirement after 20 years to the start of COVID. And she had built the program, folks, from 10,000 children to 12,000 children per year. These were all curriculum compatible, wonderful events that involved mothers, fathers, grandfathers, grandmothers. This is our little princess tea party, where all the young ladies dressed up as little princesses, and became popular. We would have 3 or 4 of these, 30 kids at a time. It was not very educational, but I did know that the president's wife was coming. So I thought, oh, that's a great idea, at least. Children are the bridge to heaven. I encourage all of you to support your local environmental ed programs associated with your school districts. Folks, these kids have been behind a screen, an iPad, an iPhone for 18 months, and they need to get in the outdoors, and they do need to learn what's going on. We call it curing nature deficit disorder. We have lost that position, that state-funded position, but we have a benevolent benefactor that's helping us limp back into it. And we just hired Dr. Alan Sowards, who's going to be leading the charge. And our very first kid event is October the 8th. So we're so excited to bring that back. And we hope the spring will see our bugs, butterflies, blossoms, birds, bees, and bats event, where we get about 1,800 children from all kinds of school districts at these learning stations. And we all know that it's so much easier to learn in the outdoors, where you can touch and get in the dirt and have fun gardening and have fun learning about nature. And that's what our goal is. If you haven't read Richard Louv's book, Last Child in the Woods, I'm stealing that kind of. It's Lost Child in the Woods is what we call it. And this is a little art piece on our Native Plant Center proceedings that we had one years ago. And I always like it because being connected socially is important, but good grief, when you're in the forest, let's put away the iPad. So in times of change, this is Aldous Huxley's Inherit the Earth. Learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. And I'm an old timer, so we do resist change as we get older, but we do have to recognize that this young generation is growing up with this in their history and their background, and that we're leaving them with a lot of challenges. The climate change, I work with a number of folks in different countries on climate change ready plants is what we call it. And it's basically looking at the future, what the future is going to be. Now, change is not a surprise to any of us. After all, it's just 12,000 years ago that we had our last ice age. And we've had plenty of times in the last million years where we had no ice at all, caps and all. And if you live in the woodlands, you might want to consider moving to Nacogdoches, Texas. I'm at 280 feet above sea level. I'm on a hill, and so I'm ready I'll be bayside property by then. So change is part of it. All the models, whether you're looking at European or our own models in this country, are showing that we're going to get, as an average temperature, we're going to get warmer. The climate is going to be more energetic. And that continues to this day in spite of last winter's freeze. And if you go back to 1880, you can see this general trend line that we are approaching 1 degree centigrade or more temperature rise, average temperature rise. These models are accurate and they do indicate a direct correlation with carbon dioxide as well as other heat generating gases. So if you look way off in the future, look at 2040, you're going to be seeing that, hey, I might be able to grow bananas in Nacogdoches. And that's a possibility, but there's other factors involved. Seeger predicted that we're going to see this piney woods diminish towards Nacogdoches to be the western edge instead of Crockett, Texas. But time will tell on these models of what the vegetation looks like. All of it's based on what we do with carbon in the atmosphere. And that's where we come in as homeowners and as landowners. We can look at what can we do to put some carbon in the atmosphere back into a growing forest, growing wood. What do they say about rainfall? Some states, if you look here, North Carolina, Virginia, not much of a change. But if you look at Texas, maybe it's time to leave. We're definitely going to be looking at some changes in precipitation. And the other part of the model, which seems to be kind of converse, is that we're going to have more weather extremes, and it just has to do with energy. So when we have energy in the atmosphere, things move fast. So a polar vortex like February of 2021 is not going to be atypical. We're going to get cold winter blasts, which would be even more challenging. We're getting warmer, we're going to have some heat, and yet we're still going to have to face some of these midwinter temperatures. This is my farm east of Nacogdoches, and I was literally 8 to 10 inches of snow, and I was trapped for 4 days. I was trapped at the farm. I couldn't get out. The roads were impassable. My dog caught a rabbit. I thought about wrestling it away from him for dinner, but I didn't. This was a very big shock on us. And the Tucker house where we office was also a snowy winterland. The key to understanding it is when you're old, you can appreciate it, because I was here in 1983, 89, and 2021, and our temperatures were cold, and they were all in December. And they got down to 3 or 4 degrees Fahrenheit, and it was a barn burner. It was epic. But this one really shook us up because it was in February. And on February the 16th, I went to -4. SFA went to -3 degrees Fahrenheit, and plants tumbled out and just committed suicide. It was that temperature right there was kind of the all-time record. Some of the records from the late 1890s are a little bit suspect, but modern history, last 100+ years, we really took a number on this. And I think this leads into this talk, which is about native plants. And it's kind of amazing in a way. There are exceptions, but native plants walk through this in pretty good shape, to be honest with you. Natives have seen this before. They've been here thousands of years. They evolved here, but many lacebarks, many exotic plants like Chinese lacebark elm is planted all over Houston, and it's considered kind of a standard. But we had a number on it, and it's done 8 degrees Fahrenheit, but -4. It said, I can't deal with this, and it just left the scene. So that's a problem. This is at the Houston airport. I took a picture of the Indian hawthorns, and I've titled it Brown is a Color Too, darn it. And basically Indian hawthorns and photinias and so many plants in central and northeast Texas just took a hit. And even in Houston, Texas, y'all may relate some of your plant losses as a result of it. The nursery industry has prospered. Patriarch trees at SFA, we're still cleaning up debris. We lost hundreds of trees on the campus. A lot of it was limb breakage, and they're old. And when you get to be an old patriarch tree, you just can't stay around. This is my crew. We penciled in, got some FEMA money for tree takedown and branch takedown, but we didn't have money for debris removal. So my staff, basically, we're still doing it. We're still inherited this mess. And the tree guys from Houston, Texas, the contract team, they dropped these logs And they did a masterful job of dropping logs, branches in between precious Japanese maples and precious plants in our garden. Of course, you get a freeze, you're followed by floods. This is an art piece, actually, in the Mast Arboretum. And we've had epic floods in April and May, more than we normally get. We normally go out in the bottom once every 2 to 3 years, but that's been a regular occurrence. Just the downbursts are just too much for our creek to bear. We're proud of our ball cypress that line about a half a mile on both sides. We have a wonderful genotype collection there, but even they are challenged. Our trialing garden, I've got some great pictures of ducks in the trialing garden. This is woody trees, woody shrubs primarily, some herbaceous. And it does show you that if you're a gardener in Texas, it doesn't matter. We're just going to keep going. Students get a little panicky. They've never seen it before, but it goes away. This is the vision of woodlands in the future, maybe. But anyway, it does show you the extent which man will do to live in a floodplain. The other aspect that kind of surprised me with all the rains, trees are weakened, and we had a number of trees just fall out of the ground. And of course, that leads to a lot of work. We've got a debris pile that was finally run through the tub grinder, and so we have mulch for 5 years. So far, we've been blessed that we haven't had a hurricane hit Nacogdoches, but this is Ike in 2008. We had 110 miles an hour wind. We've had tornadoes. This is an SFA van at Alto 2 years ago, which faculty comment, well, there goes our pay raise, but no one was in it, and everybody came through without significant injuries. But tree falls in the old water oaks, these patriarch trees have had a real hard time in the climate of today in Central Texas. Hey, folks, when you see a 600-year-old ball cypress fall out of the ground, you know that it's an epic time in terms of climate. There's another aspect of climate that I want everyone to consider is this chilling requirement. And while we had 800 or 900 hours this past winter here, we have had some very, very low chill years. I normally consider myself a 650, 700 hour area. And that kind of has held up for a good number of years, but general warming is part of it. This is 2017. And this is the epic record low chill year where we had 375 hours of chilling. And this is where native plants stand in and say, I can deal with it. And a lot of exotics cannot. And it's particularly true in Houston, where you have probably 200, 225 hours of chilling. There's a lot of exotic plants that need more cold in the winter. And basically that is recognized by the bud. We use data loggers. They're $70, and you can plug them in at the end of the season, and you can get a beautiful graph, and you can just count the hours, and you can get a very good feel for how much cold you actually got, how efficient that cold is. Really, it's between 32 and 45, where chilling really matters. And we can get as high as 12 to 1400, and we can go as low as 375 here in Nacogdoches. At 12 to 1400, you can grow golden delicious apples. But a 375 will mean this. This is a red bud, a weeping red bud that from Denny Werner's program. It's a native plant, but it was selected in a colder climate in North Carolina, and it did not really emerge until April. And so we have to not only watch that it's a native plant, but we need to kind of understand what its parentage is. Does it have some Texana blood in it? Texensis blood in it, or Mexicana blood even, to be able to deal with these low chilling temperatures. So there's a lot of new plant materials, new varieties that are natives, and you just have to realize in many cases they were introduced in states that have more cold. That is a consideration. When you look at climate, don't read these books. They're pretty discouraging. If you look at the future, this could be Nacogdoches, but I have a tendency to worry about immediate problems. And my problems right now at SFA are critters. We have critter issues of epic proportions. Wild pigs roam our Lenana Creek bottomland, and if you haven't had one visit your yard, you need to understand they are an enemy. They're an exotic animal that has gotten 4 million. There's 4 million of them in Texas. Beavers are making a huge comeback in Texas, in East Texas. Deer is a consistent problem here. We're not allowed to do anything against it except fence them out. We cannot have venison tonight. Squirrels and rabbits and other critters. And this is one morning in our ball cypress plots next to Lanana Creek. And these are all now wire caged, and that works. The beaver will not attack a wire cage ball cypress. Add to our woes of new things happening in terms of somewhat climate related, but it's also 1 million planes landing per million people landing per year in the USA. And there's a brown marmorated stink bug and an emerald ash borer. And if you have a Texas ash, you might as well give up. Asian longhorn didn't really move this far south. Spotted winged Drosophila is a real issue on blueberries and peaches and other crops. It's a relatively new insect. The brown marmorated stink bug is a little bit scary because he's quite resistant and he attacks a wide range of fruits. I have him sitting on one of our kiwi fruit here at SFA. We like a balanced approach to pest management here at SFA. We have a lot of pollinator prairies and pocket prairies, and we accept herbivory, we accept happy insects. And we try to explain that through interpretation to folks that these insects are part of our environment. So we don't run out. We do 0 actually pesticides in the landscape. We do use some weed killers. We try to have a light touch on that as well. Pulling weeds is really ridiculous when you have 128 acres. So we do use, and we're using some new chemicals now that I'm pretty excited about because they're so low rate and they're quite effective. It's a battle. So I'm always at a battle, having some kind of a war against one of our problems. It is discouraging, but I'm not going to jump from the bridge. I'm basically here to say that we're a very cheerful garden and we're blessed to have this garden. And we wouldn't have this garden if it wasn't for folks like you in our community that have stepped up, and an administration that looks at me as kind of an attractive nuisance, but we're trying to be sustainable and make a contribution to the education of students in agriculture, forestry, horticulture, botany, as well as all the other disciplines. Okay, folks, what is a native? Is it native to this county, East Texas, Gulf Coast Plain, native to the South? Is it native to the universe? And basically, when I think of a native, we think of Texas natives, but Texas is a very big state. So we do plants from Central and West Texas primarily as a part of our climate change friendly program. And I'm always looking into Mexico because if we get warmer and if we get droughtier overall, the trend line for this is that let's see what plants are maybe the future plants of our ecosystems in the future. And that's a gruesome thought, but I think it's an important one to recognize that climate is changing. And if you look 50 years or 100 years down the line, we've got some issues to deal with. There is an exotic versus native argument, and I was in the Native Plant Society of Texas, served as president. I love that organization, and I always maintain that there's a difference between exotic and invasive exotics. You're not going to have Japanese maples running the highway fence lines. And everybody agrees, whether you're an enthusiast of native plants or exotics or azaleas, that these need to be recognized and dealt with as quickly as possible. That's why we're here as an arboretum and bot garden. I have killed dozens and dozens of plants that were quite nice, quite attractive, but they were just too content in our garden. They would scatter seedlings and it was a problem. There's just a lot of room for smart horticulture if we just let it happen. Is more legislation likely? Maybe, maybe not. In this climate, probably not, but that may change. Some states do that. It mandates native plants. I always think of the native Indians and the original owners of this property here and the Caddo tribe. And they were, of course, the original anti-exotic. And the philosophy that my native is good, your native is bad is too black and white. It's a little more complicated than that. You know, our native trumpet creeper is climbing the Great Wall of China and getting in between the mortar and tearing it up. How do you get rid of this noxious weed? My friends in China have said. And I said, well, that's not a noxious weed. That's a Texas native. So it depends on how you look at it. We are affiliated at the Native Plant Center with the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. We were one of her last visits back in 1990. I guess it was 97. One of her last outages, and there's Bob Brunick, and really a wonderful experience. And she taught me a lot. Actually, she was quite a crusty lady, and I spent quite a bit of time with her, and I consider it one of the high spots. And if you've been to the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, they're under the University of Texas now, but they do wonderful work. So my native is good, your native is bad. Let's just look at adapted plants and maintaining ecosystems. One thing for sure is the enthusiasts in horticulture have strong opinions, and the hostility of gardeners is only equal to those of popes and bishops, etc. And it is true that we get excited about this, but we're all gardeners and we're all here to have a better world, and horticulture is a part of that. Why native plants? Well, there's so many of them that are absolutely beautiful, and they're part of the mainstream trade, and we should use them and look for cultivars and look for selections that please us even more. And of course, there's the ecological aspect. Our cities tend to be native trees and exotic shrubs, if you think about it. So connecting more with the native shrubs of our area, those that we find to be landscape plant materials, I think is quite important, and it maintains a cohesion with the natural landscape of the area. And it connects us with the native ecology, whether that's the insects and the herbivory and the pollinators. And I always tell students here at SFA when I was teaching that if you become a native plant enthusiast the minute your client says, I love native plants. And there's a reason for that, because landscapers and nurserymen are trying to make a living, and it's not always easy. And so native plants fits that mantra. Natives are more disease and insect resistant in general, but it's not always true. Insects evolve along with our native plants. Natives are more drought resistant. That totally depends on the plant and where it came from. If it's a swamp marsh loving plant and you put it in a xeric spot, it may not have a good time. Natives are less invasive. There's a lot of exceptions to that. I can promise you, we pull sweet gum all the time. And so it's in native elms as well. Why not for the just native plants? Well, maybe we miss out on exciting plants that are not invasive, and it's really hard to replace certain plants in the landscape that have become mainstream. There's some fear that if we mandate native plants that we might exploit the wild if it were mandated. That's an argument that's been used. I don't agree with it. I think that the nursery industry will respond to consumer demands is what it boils down to. I'm so lucky to have Lynn Lowry as one of my mentors back in the, believe it or not, in the 70s and 80s, traveled with him quite a bit. And he had a 90-10 rule, and I think it's pretty good. 90% of your landscape should be bone hardy Texas tough natives, and pick the ones you like. And there's a wonderful, wonderful list of candidates for that. And then 10% you play with. And that's part of horticulture, is finding new plants and finding those that you enjoy. Lynn was a special person. He connected with plants beautifully. He connected plants with people, and he connected with really all of us here. There's a lot of plants in our landscapes that came through his hands originally. The old timers like Lynn Lowry and Benny Simpson and Barton Warnock, I was lucky to know them. Benny was a great native plantsman up at Dallas. And Barton did so much great botanical work, and Lynn was just all over the landscape. So they don't make these folks like they used to. But Margie has passed, but she was a precious soul at Meet Louisiana. I identify with the Louisiana quite well, because it's a very similar. We're in the Piney Woods region, so it fits. And All those folks have made a difference in our garden and in our philosophy of garden. My opinion is native plants are great, but gardening is fun and we should capitalize on it. Our Native Plant Center, welcome to the Piney Woods Native Plant Center, 42 acres, a beautiful home, all native plants. And we have a wonderful facility. We have our native dogwoods that were planted in 1930s, and some of them were naturalized here. We have a great horticulture facility. We have 7 miles of trails in the garden complex here, and we do have asphalt, which is amazing to me because you're mandated with the American Disability Act compliance since we're on state property. And it's really worked out beautifully here. We do signage and interpretation in the garden to kind of explain what you're looking at. And then we have label nightmares all over the place. And we do have AutoCAD maps and Excel databases. We're trying to get rid of the invasive exotics and have done a pretty good job. We brush axe the place, we've treated, and we're letting native plants come back from the seed bank, and it's working. You just have to have a due diligence when you're working with a landscape of that scale. Invasive plants are unwarranted intruders, and we explain why we want native yaupons and the southern sugar maple, Acer barbatum, to win. And we hate Chinese tallow tree because they do own the place, and Chinese privet. There's so many exotics that have found a foothold in East Texas, and they kind of own the place. And they keep our native plants from showing themselves. We believe in fire. We didn't have a fire in 2020, but we have annual fires in the perched upland marsh. We get the kids involved in the school districts, and we chase the rabbits and bobcats out first. And we end up with burning our marsh, and we have a wonderful marsh that features native plants. This is a perched upland wetland. It's underlain by Weeches rock. We are the home of the only green roof in maybe the world that you can actually set on fire. Imagine that. We've set this prairie on fire several times. This is in the early days when we established it. We haven't burned it in a long time because I got in a little bit of trouble for somebody turned it in. I had a fire truck here, but I had reported it, but it just, they don't like to send out a fire truck, I promise you. So wonderful facility. We do have a endangered plant conservation program. We're here to protect the wildflowers. We call it the 3 R's: rescue, research, and reintroduction. Our 3 signature endangered plants of Texas. There's about 50 that fall on this list, folks. But Hibiscus daisicalix, the Neches River rose mallow, phlox, the Texas trailing phlox, and Gaillardia aestivilis. There's others that are not endangered, but they're certainly endangered in Texas. So the Stewartia malacodendron is a little more prevalent. It's rare everywhere. It's a very tricky plant. We have it established in the garden as well. Only one location near the Jasper-Newton County line, and it's got troubles. A wonderful small tree. Franklinia is extinct in the wild. It came in from the Alatamar River in Georgia, and we have finally, it's kind of one of those plants that's born looking for a place to die. And it was discovered by Bartram in the wild, but then when he went back, it disappeared. It disappeared because of cotton root rot. How about that? Anyway, a beautiful plant, a beautiful flower, very tricky to grow and susceptible to any kind of drainage issues. If it gets water around it, it needs moisture, but it does not like wet feet. Good fall color. So we're excited that it's alive and well at SFA Gardens. This is our Texas trailing phlox. This is our Gaillardia, which is actually now out in the trade, and we have color forms of it, and it's a Texas tough, drought resistant son of a gun. It's a beautiful plant and just keeps on blooming, and it's attractive and very, very drought resistant. Highly recommended if you have drainage. We'll talk about that in a minute. What does drainage actually mean? Hibiscus daisicalix, there's only 4 natural populations in Texas. In the world, 11 designated critical habitats. And to be honest with you, it's being overrun by other hibiscus in the wild. It just can't compete. And there's some herbivory issues with it. It's a very fascinating plant. We do use it in the landscape. By the way, it does look, it's the narrowest leafed hibiscus in the world. It does look a little bit like marijuana. I have seen plants that have had cuttings. I'm assuming students take it home and dry it and think it's marijuana. But when it flowers, you know it's not. Great plant. We have a hibiscus daisicalic salvation team. Believe it or not, that's Dr. David Culhavy, and we work in the wild. There's others that are not endangered, but should be used in our landscapes. And I think any landscape in Texas, this is my wife, Janet, in her yard, in our yard there. And basically, she's a native plant enthusiast of Louisiana originally. And that's Spigelia marylandica, Indian pink. And if you're not growing it, you should, because it's a showstopper for sure. Really a beautiful native plant, and it'll shoot seed 10 feet away, and it'll pop up in your garden. And I'm trying to teach our landscapers, you recognize that. Let's keep it. Let's turn this thing into an Indian pink home. We have natural trout lilies here at SFA Gardens in the Native Plant Center, and we're trying to keep them going as well. Many of you have never heard of Antenaria. It is called pussy toes. It's in the wild here. It's not very common. It's fire resistant. Fires in the woods will kind of run up next to it. And I don't know why they never enter, but they don't. Bloodroot is in the bottomlands of the Native Plant Center, an uncommon but priceless plant if you have it in your landscape. Lilia Moshoei. This is Janet and the previous owner, Mimi Tucker, in the 1930s. Established some colonies, and they're still here. It's one of the most beautiful lilies that we can grow in Texas. I've been working with ball cypress. It's an interesting case study for what we talk about with climate change. Now, the interesting thing about ball cypress is that it's 65 plus million years old, and it goes back to the age of the dinosaurs. So it's a survivor. It's in the age of the conifers. It was all over the world. And it has really no serious insect pests or diseases, and it is a carbon fixing example for the big tree world. The botanists have changed it to 3: ball cypress, pond cypress, and Montezuma cypress. And Montezuma cypress is a Texas native, folks. It's in far South Texas, and we've worked with all 3 species here for a long time, and other countries are working with breeding them. We don't do any breeding here. We do selections as well. Some of you know Heidi Sheashley's shop, wonderful garden, Tree Search Farms, and she was one of the first to plant ball cypress, Montezuma cypress, and pond cypress, and that's how that works out. They grow. They are deciduous conifers. Montezuma cypress and pond do not have knees. That's a very negative landscape trade for the landscapers, whether you're maintenance or establishment. People discount ball cypress because of knees, but Montezuma cypress has no knees, and the new hybrids do not have any knees. This is was the biggest ball cypress in the oldest, 3,000 years old at Lockwood, Florida, and it burned to the ground, and it's gone. And that was the national champion. It was burned by a young lady who took a picture of it on fire. She was actually cooking meth. And I used to post her picture, but she served her time. And it's so sad to lose a 3,000-year-old tree, but I'm happy to say that a horticulturist had gotten some wood and grafted it, and he had a small collection of them. And we now have this tree grafted in the gardens and gardens across the South. It's a heritage plant. It's a heritage tree. With that tree gone, this is the new world champ, I guess you can call it. Not for height, the top knocked out of it, but it's in near Cat Island, Louisiana, and most of the time it's underwater. And it's really hard to get a feel for the size of this tree. It's thought to be about 1,800 years old, but it is big, and you can only see it by canoe most of the time, believe it or not. Shangri-La, our very own Shangri-La garden in Southeast Texas, near Orange, Texas, is really a outlier because pond doesn't usually move over into Texas, but we sure have a beautiful tree there, and it's fenced off and protected quite well. Pond has ascendant foliage. It's pretty easy to tell apart from bald and Montezuma. Finally, the Montezuma cypress, and one of my epic bucket list was to go to that tree, and I've been there several times. And we have this tree in our collection as well, and surprise, surprise, it's quite hardy. Why would a tree that never sees a freeze in its own habitat basically have that kind of ability to deal with our cold? And the reason is it's got a genome 4 times bigger than a human's. 65 million years of evolution, and it has tucked away in it. Some seedlings are actually going to end up being hardy, and the tree itself carries genes for hardiness. So I think that's quite a testimony to a resilient tree that is now appreciated worldwide for its longevity, its heartwood, and its contribution to carbon capture. That tree in Oaxaca, Mexico is got warts and ticks just like everybody does when they get old. It's really a bucket list tree. So in our 20 plus, 30 plus years here, we've put together one of the finest collections of genotypes. We called it Bald is Beautiful, but it's basically a collection from the East Coast all the way up into Illinois, and we have seedlings from trees everywhere that we've documented in accession for years and years. And I also worked with Chinese who have taken our native plant and improved it by controlled crosses and growing out seedlings. It's really kind of remarkable. And basically the main disease that attacks our natives and attacks the Western bald, if you try to grow Western bald here in East Texas, normally you'll get a little bit of Cercosporidia. It's a leaf rust. Doesn't hurt the tree too much, just makes it ugly. But there's a variety called Lanana, which came out of the China breeding program, and it is totally resistant. There's Heidi there, absolutely resistant to Cercosporidia, and we're promoting it. So if you want a fast growing ball cypress that kind of wants to be evergreen and never has knees, and you get yourself a wire tube for your beaver problem, you have a tree that'll be here 100,000 years from now. People say, how big will it get? And I say, well, in 3,000 years, it'll own your city lot. There's 406 on the Lanana Creek, showing you the good form and the really wonderful foliage that it has with no knees. So consider that in the future. We grow a lot of ball cypress here, and this is how we do it. We have a steel T-post, and we irrigate the first year or two only. That's it. And then we remove the drip pipe and we're off and running. We also have cultivars. There's a lot of varieties that are out there. These have to be grafted. They're hard to root. So this is the one called Cascade Falls, and we made a tunnel out of it. I made a circle tree hinge, and in the middle of it, I put a dwarf. This is from Grand Saline, Texas, found by Jim Berry. We named it Jim's Little Guy. And basically, it's 20 feet in 20 years. How's that for a diminutive? So if you want a ball cypress, you can get one that is a little more in scale with your landscape. I kind of made this up. We had a native plant conference, and I thought the age of a quercus, actually my wife came up with it to give her credit. And this shows you the age of a quercus, and actually Houston is better suited for this. This is live oaks are truly native to the Gulf South, and they're really not native to Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio. Well, they are maybe in San Antonio in Northeast Texas. So we had problems with live oaks during this mega freeze because they're coming out of seedlings. It's a seedling based economy, and we all know what oaks can do in the landscape when they get time and age, shallow rooted, and they can push up sidewalks. We have them all over the campus. Wonderful, dependable evergreen. And when you ask a landscaper, name an evergreen oak, he's going to say live oak. There are a lot of other oaks. I love bur oaks. I think the acorn is wonderful for chunking. I love Texas red oaks. Just has beautiful fall foliage, white oaks, shumards, newdalls, cherry barks. There's just so many that we have here, which leads me into what is this word nativars? Many of you are already familiar with it. You're gardeners, and basically nativars are actual clones that have been taken from a collection of the species, lots of different seedlings. So this is what happens when you plant live oaks that are seedlings. Every child is different because it's a result of a sexual cross. Every seed is different. So you have a problem. But if you can root it, if you can graft it, you can make a very uniform, cut out of a cookie mold type of tree. And that's one is a live oak named Cathedral. We have a number of them that are actually available. So if you live in the woodlands and there's a lane to your house a quarter mile long, this is the kind of tree you'd want to stream along both sides to create that allay that says something important is about to come up. That's what these clonal live oaks are all about. I'm a plant collector, and this is exciting to me, but it's not chlorotic. It is golden. live oak. And so it has to be grafted. And we're lucky through Adam Black, he brought me the wood, that we've got this kind of started. And we have one good tree here and lots of live oaks to graft on. We hope to be able to offer you a golden live oak in the future. Really appreciate some of the help that we had getting this through the system, our propagation system. Of course, pines, we're pine country, and we have short leaves, loblollies, and long leaves, but they're too big and they fall in your house, and they're a real problem. They do fall over quite easy in wind and ice storms, etc., and are not normally long-lived except in their native habitat. But there is a Nana, Ted Doremus Nursery sells it, and I've got seedlings from a witch's broom. I have 50 of these. So if you take the seed from a witch's broom, which is a dense ball that you sometimes see in the top, it's a genetic mutation, take the seed out of it, 95% of them will be normal, but you'll get some of these, and each one of them is a little bit different. And so we've got 50 of these we selected out of 1,200, and we're looking for some new nanas. And these are 3 years old, folks. So you have a loblolly pine shrubby kind of landscape plant. Eastern red cedar is common in the central Texas in particular, but there's some great selections. I love woodlanders weeping. I love Burkeye. Gray owl is may have some other genetics in it, I suspect, but it's touted as a Virginiana. Nice blue foliage for a long period of time. So we collect these cultivars of native plants and test them. Most people curse liquid amber, sweet gums, and for good reason in some cases, but there's a new one on the block, and I encourage you to try it. And it's Slender Silhouette, found by Don Shadow, and it'll get 60 feet tall, but it's 8 foot wide, and it has pretty good fall color. And basically people say, well, does it have sweet gum balls? And I said, yes, but they don't fall far from the tree. So, I mean, you can collect them easy and get them out of the way. But we created a labyrinth at SFA Gardens, and basically it's a place for meditation, and we circle them with slender silhouettes, and it's really worked out to be a really striking landscape. And it's a place where you can come and reflect on the COVID world and the economic world, and what the heck has happened. All these native plants, not all of them, but many of them have selections, and they are clonally propagated by cuttings or by grafting, typically, some by tissue culture. So this is our native river birch, but we have Dura heat, and it really is a denser form and keeps its foliage better. River birches tend to shed their foliage in early fall, late summer, actually. We have a new one here that's called City Slicker, and it's just got better exfoliating bark, and the breeder is working towards getting a white, really a shiny one. Magnolias, this is the second largest magnolia. This is half of the tree, burned in the middle, but this is in Georgia, and this is what ancient Magnolia grandifloras want to be. They do want to own your yard, but there are little dwarfs, and Little Gem is quite popular in Houston, Texas, and across the Gulf South. And it's certainly diminutive, and it's worth taking a look at. Teddy Bear is small. There's a whole bunch of them. Alta has got a narrow profile. And so if you're interested in a Magnolia grandiflora that doesn't get to be a giant, you might want to look at some of these cultivars that have all the traits and attributes of the variety of the species native to the Gulf South, and yet you get a special form. I'm trying to encourage people to understand that magnolias can be pleached, and you'll see this in the Southern Europe and France. Basically, you can shave them, and you can do this for 100 years and keep them in bounds, believe it or not. They can get to be quite large, but yet you can shave them in the winter and they come back. And you do that every 5 years, and so we're doing some screens here at SFA Gardens, and every 5 years, see that high voltage line, I've got to keep it out of there or I'll get in trouble. And basically that's what we do with Magnolia grandiflora, as well as having a collection. Our Sweet Bay, native to Texas and across Gulf South. I love the plant. I love the tree. I think it's underutilized, but we do have dwarfs of it as well. Sweet Thing is one that we're pretty excited about. There's a few other cultivars. I just like the native straight species, actually. No native genus has traveled the world more than our native redbuds and some of the hybrids between other redbuds. And this is forest a pansy on a campus here. And you may buy Oklahoma, and it's a good variety because it has Texensis blood in it, the Texensis genetics in it. And it gives you that spring harbinger that we're all looking for. Dan Hosage found this one in Central Texas. I love this plant. It's a really true weeper of a Central Texas redbud. It's got the wavy leaf. There's a little reniformis in it. Redbuds are a little promiscuous. Basically, they get out and move around quite a bit. So there's some genetics between Texensis and reniformis and Mexicana that are kind of a natural populations, actually. Appalachian Red is with us, and look at the varieties that have come out of different breeding programs, and some of them work and some of them do not. Merlot doesn't work very well. My wife does not like it because it doesn't flower as much. Alley Cat does real well here. Rising Sun looks pretty good. Ace of Hearts is a much smaller form. Hearts of Gold is a new one I can't say much about yet. Denny Werner invented this through his breeding program at North Carolina State, and it works here. It's got some Texensis in it, which gives it that low chill adaptation. And it's got 50 petals. Doesn't even look like a red bud. Looks like a flowering cherry. And here's the one that is knocking everybody's sock off. And this is in my nursery here, and this is Flamethrower, and it looks adapted. I've had it here 3 years under trial. Adapted to Nacogdoches. It still isn't tested much in Houston, Texas, but when you have foliage like that, you really don't need flowers, and it does this all spring long. So it's really a showy thing. And Dennis Werner is the inventor, and the inventory supply he cannot keep up through the licensed nurseries that he's working with. So I'm excited about this plant. I think it's a game changer in the redbud world. This is a Shelby County Courthouse. I love Yopons because it's a wonderful native plant. It does have an associated insect, the midge, but it's not usually that damaging. But this is what most people do, is I don't know why we want to make these into green meatballs, but we do. And this is a native that wants to be quite large. And we really should be using a Nana, a form, a variety that is meant to be small, but you can make them into anything you want. And this is in Shreveport, Louisiana, and he does his whole landscape like this. He's a lawyer, folks, and I'm sure he's not on this webinar, but I always say he clips his clients by day and his hedges by night, and he does this all over his yard. I don't know what maybe it's a control thing, but Yopons are natural gracefully, but when you get out there and you do a Japanese maple like this is too much. I thought about leaving a note on his door, say, stop this, but I didn't. Then Janet wouldn't let me. There's the Nana, and see, it's already diminutive, and it doesn't want to get big, and it just lends itself. This is the Idea Garden at Tyler, Texas. Lots of varieties. We still love Pride of Houston, came out of Houston, a wonderful native, just really berries up. Saratoga Gold, Virginia Dare, Lynn Lowry introduced the big leaf. Don't even see it anymore, but it does have a very, very big leaf. Will Fleming is not so upright. He's in the Houston area, and he introduced it. It's a male. So Yopons are male and female, and I'm not against males, but they don't have berries, so they're discounted in the trade quite a bit. Scarlet Peak is an upright female, however. It's just not as available as it should be. But we bought in a bunch of liners from South Louisiana, Mississippi, and may get some more just to get them scattered around. Just don't see it in the trade, and we should. This is the Healing Garden at the Native Plant Center. Deciduous Holly is the same situation, basically. Paco is a Heidi Sheasley introduction from Tree Search Farm. We like it a lot. It's bright orange. Finch's Gold is Bill Finch's introduction from South Alabama. Sweet Shrub, not native to Texas, but it is in Louisiana, and forgive me for that. I love Calacanthus because of the fragrance, and it's a unique and very, very tough native. And there's a new one in town, but I can't seem to see it in any of the retail or big box houses. Burgundy Spice And it needs to have a cross with Athens, which is Calacanthus floridas Athens. And it's a kind of a yellow cream flowered. And as a result, it doesn't get hidden by this unbelievable foliage and very, very vigorous plant. We find it easy to root and easy to move around. It is patented, but it's not being made available. You can see why it's hard to recognize this extremely fragrant flower. You can see our chicken wire cage to try to protect it from deer. There is an exotic, and the Ralston Arboretum crossed our native with it and came up with Hartledge wine, which is also a pretty darn good plant. So it's half China and half American, and it doesn't care. It seems to be quite happy. Calacarpa, beautyberry, we're introducing in probably this next year, resurrecting, let me say, through Adam Black, a white form. We have several white forms called, this one's we're going to name Lowry's Ghost, because it's kind of disappeared, and it really is pretty. And Matt's Pink is one that my former student Matt Welch found in the Davy Crockett National Forest. And if you have a pink flowered, pink berried beautyberry, it probably came through SFA Gardens' hands. We do azaleas. This is Barbara Stump. We have 16 acres of azalea gardens with other plants, but we do a lot of deciduous native azaleas. Folks, there's 6, and they're uncommon and shouldn't be. There's 6 native azaleas in the South. And when you think about azaleas in your area and my area, you realize that they're not easy, and it's really always based on soil pH and drainage. So they don't want to sit in a puddle. They have to be somewhat elevated to deal with it. And there's so many azaleas in Houston that are struggling with the floods and struggling with the aftermath, and also some poor water quality depending on where you're at. These are the players, except for the guy on your left there. This is Margie Jenkins at Meet Louisiana Jenkins Nursery, and that's Buddy Lee, who invented the Encore azalea. But Margie is the character that I identify with the most. She lived to be 98, and there wasn't a morning that she got up that she didn't want to run into her nursery and run into her garden. This young lady could root a fence post. She was a good propagator, a good native plant person. Our native of Texas is Canescens. We also have a Blongifolium that we have in the collection as well, but Canescens is the one that's quite beautiful. Spring sensation, being a lot of varieties now of the deciduous azaleas. Sherry Randall and Barb Stump work for me, and we have an epic database, mega freeze data. And so some of these azaleas that are exotic went to the ground. Not a single deciduous azalea blinked. And our natives said hello. But you got to realize our azaleas are Korean, Chinese, Japanese heritage, and they're pretty darn tough. But -4 did a number. It even made me coin a new word, deciduous evergreen azaleas. And what that means is the freeze took every leaf off, but the flower buds still managed to make it. In most cases, we're having to cut these dramatically back to get to good wood. 8 inches of snow may have saved us in so many ways. This is Astrinum. This is a Bob McCartney introduction. He calls it yellow number 3, not very creative with his naming, but good, tough. These make small trees if you want them to be. You can whack them back after bloom, and they bloom with the foliage barely started. So it's quite dramatic in the landscape. And our Canescens can get to be huge, 20 feet tall if you want them to be. They make small trees. And what's different between this native and our exotics is this fragrance. They are exceedingly fragrant, and all of the cultivars will knock you dead on a still morning in the garden. So take a look at them. They're tricky to market because they have, they're deciduous a lot of times when you buy them. They're brittle is another reason. And so that little window of bloom for 2 or 3 weeks is tricky to hit in the marketplace. So a lot of times when you're buying evergreen azaleas, at least you have a round green meatball with flowers on it to look at. Deciduous azaleas needs to be more of a discriminating consumer, in my opinion. We love the deciduous azaleas at the Pineywood Native Plant Center. And if you use Ostrinum inflamium blood genetics, there's selections being made that are really knockouts. And I get a lot of phone calls. What is that plant? And I say, well, it's a native Ostrinum selection. And Bobby Green named it Tutti Frutti. So point is that we have both exotics and natives. This is a Little Miss Princess Tea Party a few years ago, and we've mixed the deciduous azaleas in the collection, and we've got the exotic azaleas in there, and they seem to be getting along quite well. We have rules at SFA. Basically, we plant in the fall. This is trees and shrubs. Perennials is another story, and we like drainage. So you're seeing Matt and Rob, my two students here, with a new plant, a bare root plant that we got in, and we're putting it on a berm. And we berm everywhere because we're in a bottomland. I consider the woodlands a bottomland. It's just anything you can do to improve the drainage. And mulch, we do a lot of mulching at SFA Gardens, pine straw, wood chips, whatever, we accept it. But our goal is to keep that drainage, keep that plant from sitting in water. Even though this is ball cypress, it's a good example, but it could deal with some flooding and drainage. But most cases, when I look at landscapes in East Texas and in Houston, drainage issues are really way up there at the top of the heap of problems. We drip a lot. It's real frustrating, but we have a water bill that we have to deal with, and we don't want to talk about 2010 and 11. It was horrendous. So I'm just looking to give water to these plants for the first year or two, and then we'll move the drip line and curl it around so that we can get it. It's establishment. Ball cypress needs drip the first year or two or three, and then after that it can live 1,000 years. So what you do that first year is critical to the establishment of a tree or a shrub. They've got a root system that's been banged up, they've traveled miles, and you're asking a lot to deal with. So plant in the fall. As far as fertility is concerned, we do not fertilize once the plant is well established. We might give them a little bump of slow release for the first year or two, but after that, they have to live off of the mulch and the organic matter and the compost and the natural habitat. That's part of our program. I'd like you to join us at our fall plant sale, which is on October the 9th and 10th. We are no longer virtual. We're coming back. We're scattering this thing way out, and we're hoping for a good crowd. And we absolutely need the money to feed staff, to be honest with you. So lots of native plants, lots of crazy new plants, and it's a fun event for 2 days. So contact us at any time. We'll give you a lesson on why not to lift a plant by its neck. There's my volunteer, shocked at Jeff Brewer. Carried a plant, but that's an indication, I guess, that the root system is pretty good. So I'd like to say thank you. There's my email. If you have any questions, you can visit us on our SFA Gardens Facebook page. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Let's see.
So you might want to open your chat window to see if you had any questions directly. We're mostly interested in knowing whether you feel as though the fact you don't use chemicals on your garden areas helps create that better soil health. Do you think that's a big factor to that?
I think so. Let's see if I can get to, I'm going to stop the share here. Is that okay?
Sure.
And there we go. Basically, yes. And actually, this is an evolution in our minds here. When we started the garden, we used an incredible amount of chemistry to help us get through it, and religiously fertilized, etc. But over the years, once the plant is established and has a certain size, I'm not interested in getting much bigger. I just want it to be healthy. And so that little kick at the beginning of a slow release or organic matter or compost or dairy manure. We've done a lot of different things in that respect, and we use a lot of campus waste as mulch. I don't care what I use as mulch. It can be hardwood as well as softwood. My soils, Terry, are naturally low pH, and we have good high quality soils, and we have in most of the garden an overhead canopy. And that creates its own difficulties. I'm always hunting sunlight, and this is a problem in the woodlands too. And if you have sun-loving trees, you can't plant a ball cypress in the shade. It'll live, it won't grow, and it'll wait. And when the tree falls over it, it's got a patch of sunlight, it'll take off. But we feel like after all of the mulching we've done, we don't need fertilizer, and we feel like we can water less, because the organic matter in the mulch has made for a real healthy rhizosphere. The root system has got a good zone, and we're using less and less chemistry. In the greenhouse operation for our plant sale, we're pretty much zero. And when we have problem plants, we move them outside. And to be honest with you, if our perennials and woody trees and shrubs can't deal with that, we don't want them in our collection. We want to provide consumers with plants that have been tested here for Texas durability. One of the plants that I can mention to you is crepe myrtles and crepe myrtle bark scale. And you have crepe myrtle bark scale. This is a new pest since 2004. I'm on a project with Dr. Mung Mung Gu, and I'm very discouraged about the long term with crepe myrtle bark scale. There is chemistry to deal with it, but nobody plants a crepe myrtle on the highways or anywhere to watch it go to pieces with crepe myrtle bark scale, and we're not going to spray. We're not going to take care of it with chemistry. So here's an exotic tree that is $100 million to the nursery industry in the South. It's a mainstream plant. Everybody has to have a crepe myrtle. But we're inheriting this insect since 2004 from China. It came in, that's our theory. And it's a problem. It's a problem in China, and it's just ubiquitous. Our native plants have insects that are associated with it. In most cases, if the plant is healthy, it deals with it fine. We have gall midge on ball cypress. We have all kinds of things on plants. And we like pollinators, and we like caterpillars. And so and we have this argument here at SFA Gardens because we have a plant sale, and nobody wants to see a leaf that's eaten. But we like to explain that put it in your prairie. It's a prairie pocket, your garden, your mixed border, and you're contributing to the native ecology. And somewhere, somehow, a bird is going to have a happy lunch and get that caterpillar. So it's a constant balance of consumers and what they think, and our attempt to educate them that not all insects are bad, and a little bit of here and there, they have a right to be on this earth just as we do. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. And do you find that by keeping that use of chemical fertilizers out of your planting, that you do see those beneficial insects come in and actually help control the things that might show up you don't want?
I think you're right. We have, many years ago, we had a lot of troubles with spider mites and azalea lacebug. Azalea lacebug is a problem, and it's an insect that can really work your azaleas over. But by just reducing, kind of dealing with it, just kind of letting it go, and there's some varieties that are more susceptible that we've discarded. In finding those varieties that are not susceptible to it, really, or lethal to it, we don't use the chemistry associated with the azalea lacebugs. It used to be quite extensive. We would spray 8 acres, and we don't do that anymore. Those days are gone at SFA Gardens, and it's not because it's illegal. It's just because it's our philosophy that we don't want consumers to have a landscape that they have to take care of with chemistry all the time.
Well, and discouraging those beneficial insects,
Absolutely.
those pollinators. Yeah. So about your plant sale coming up, you said October 9 and 10.
Yeah, we're having a 2-day event.
Okay, what times are those plants available?
You could go to SFA Gardens Facebook, and it has the complete inventory of 300 plants, and we have a lot of plants this time. We've accumulated plants. We had virtual in 2020 and spring of 2021, and I don't want to talk about virtual plant sales. Let's just say I'm not driving the new truck with a sunroof. We're in trouble here. So we're hopeful that we can get the people back out because we can scatter them out. We have a huge sales yard, and it'll be in the open air, which is usually considered to be somewhat safer. And we're in Texas. You know, we couldn't have this plant sale in New York, but this is Texas, and we're all triple boosted here in Nacogdoches. So we're hopeful that we can get a good crowd, and it's a lot of fun. And the list is available at the sale as well as online if you want to print it. So we have an SFA Gardens Facebook page, and you can just Google our website, and it's on there too under events.
Okay, and did you say what time of day the sale opens in the mornings?
I think the kickoff is 9 a.m. and we have a yellow line that we put there with tape, and my students lead people in. Saunter in. It's not a mad rush. In the early days of the SFA Gardens plant sale, I encouraged chaos, and I played the Oklahoma land rush, and people knocked each other over, and it was a mess. And some of your Woodlands people may have been there, and I thought it was fun, and but it was not fun for senior citizens who got knocked over. So now we have a very civilized stroll into the sales yard, which is probably 2 acres of plants scattered out in blocks, and it's pretty much A to Z, and your list is A to Z, and so it works out pretty good.
All right, so outside of the plant sale, are the gardens open to the public on any kind of schedule?
No, 24 hours a day. You can enter them from many angles. There's lots of parking, and it's easy to get into this garden.
And I will say from personal experience, those grounds are so fascinating to wander through. Some of the trails, some of the walkways, but the various areas are just, I mean, fascinating was the word to me, that you can see such a huge diversity of native plants growing there, and get a real sense of how they look in the landscape, because they are in a landscape. One last question for you. So do you deal with turf grass at all there in the gardens, in the plantings, in the nursery, anywhere?
We do a lot of prairie work. So Dawn Stover is my research associate. So she's working with the native grasses, and she works with Texas Parks and Wildlife Nature Conservancy. And we do a lot of contract grow for pocket prairies, believe it or not. We're desperate, so we're working with some agencies, and it's helped us out a lot. She's done a remarkable job, but we do have lawns here. We're part of a campus. We don't fertilize them, and we just mow them. And I don't like that, but that is part of our program. We do a lot of mowing at SFA, the university proper. I work very closely with grounds. The director of grounds at SFA is Gary Williams, and he's my former student. So we have we're co-conspirators for a greener world, and he lets me slip trees on the campus. You know, we have committees and things and rules, bylaws, procedures, but we break those, and we slip a lot of plant material onto the campus as well.
Would you say that there are some demonstration areas where people could wander through and see some native grass areas, especially some of those lower growing native grasses that might be suitable for urban landscapes?
Not signed and interpreted yet. Labels are an issue, but yes, we do have a landscape here at the front of the Piney Woods Native Plant Center, in front of the Tucker House, which is this home that I'm officing in. And basically we have a lot of grasses there, and Dawn is working on the signage and the labeling and the interpretation. But if you knock on the door, we'll come out and talk to you. We like visitors.
All right, Dr. Creech. Well, that's all the questions we have. And I know all of us are excited to have heard what you had to say. It was remarkably interesting, and all the comments coming in through chat are thanking you. So um, if anyone has a question, would you just tell us your email address one more time? I see
Uh,
it's if they hover over your image there
there
on
it
their
is.
screen.
Yeah, you can contact me there anytime.
All right, Dr. Creech. Well, thank you to everyone who joined us today. I hope you found it informative, entertaining, and helpful in an overall way. Um, be sure to visit the Woodlands Township website and go to Environmental Services if you want to see some other upcoming things we have.